Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read through it. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Did you print that?
Yes, I have all that stuff. Now that I'm set up, I can go grab that. I've opened every door. It's running now. Anything else that you have?
Well, it is 7 o'clock, and this is a special meeting, special association meeting of the Virginia-Highland Civic Association, and I will call it to order with board members Lyson, Paige, Jennifer, such a comment, Lola, and me, and a couple more will be late. We'll be here. Mr. Becker is away. Ms. Wyndham is away. And will not be here. We have 3 items of business to conduct tonight. The VHCA board response to the petition to have a special election on the Virginia-Highland Master Plan. And so I'll throw.
Well, sure, let me, I'll just enumerate all 3, and then we're going to discuss each topic. So pursuant to the notice that was sent out, as Jack said, there'll be 3 items that we'll discuss. The first one is the VHCA board response to petition to have special election on the Virginia-Highland Master Plan. The second item is VHCA bylaws requirements for special association meetings and votes by association members. And the third one is discussion of process used to develop the Virginia-Highland Master Plan. So again, we'll be discussing all 3 of those, and we'll go in order. So we will start with the first one. So again, the first item is VHCA board response to petition to have a special election on the Virginia-Highland Master Plan. And I'll give a brief overview to everyone. At the last Virginia-Highland Civic Association board meeting in April, a petition was presented that had 56 signatures. The petition requested that there be a special meeting to allow a vote on the master plan. It also said that the petition requested that any individual recommendation in the plan which receives less than 50% support of those voting at the special meeting will be deemed not to be supported by the VHCA. So that is the petition, and I guess I will start off by giving the board response to the petition. And items 1 and 2 overlap a bit, so even though I said we'll discuss them in order, the 3 will overlap. So to begin with, the board response to the petition. The response to the petition was to call this special meeting. And under the bylaws of the Civic Association, a special meeting can be called, or must be called, pursuant to a petition signed by 50 members of the association. So that's what we have done. In response to the petition, we have called this special meeting. So on that first item, are there any comments or questions to the board about the special meeting here tonight?
may want to rephrase or restate the question. Looks like we picked up another 10 or 12 people.
Sure, if you will, too, when you speak, thanks. State your name and your street address, just your road, where you live.
Sure, that would have been the right direction to begin with. My name is Peter Giroux. I live at 1145 Rosedale Drive.
Thanks. We have some agendas here. We'll be glad to pass them out, but I know people will keep coming in. So we'll reset it once. We have these 3 items for the agenda that we're going to discuss in order. Ms. Keenan just gave our first piece of response to them. We're welcome to have any comments or thoughts from the audience.
Question of the things that were on the petition I signed.
If you will, please state your name, just your name.
My name is David Eckhoff.
Right.
And my name is David Eckhoff. My question is, of the things that were on the petition, I signed the petition. One of the things that interested me was the petition that wrote on the master plan. Question here in your remarks, and what I was looking for that on the petition for is why is that not on the agenda for tonight?
Excuse me 1 second. Girls, Charlotte and Ken, quiet guys. I apologize, everyone. My husband is out of town. So, accept my apologies. Well, I think that actually gets us into item number 2. And item number 2 is the VHCA bylaw requirements for special association meetings and vote by association members. And the VHCA board consulted a lawyer to review our bylaws and provide an opinion on what is required under the bylaws, and specifically what is required in response to a petition. So I'd like to introduce Bob Zeckler, who can give just a brief overview of what is required under the bylaws with respect to special meetings and petitions.
Is Bob Becker the attorney who reviewed it?
Yes.
Hey everybody, I'm Bob Zeckler. My firm is Maddox Mitchell Zeckler. I've been in practice for about 32 years at a local governmental land use practice. I was 15 years in the Atlanta City Attorney's Office as a senior assistant in charge of zoning and planning. I've been in my firm for about 16 years with a mixed bag of neighborhood association representation, local government, things like that. I was asked by the board to look through bylaws about what the parameters for voting by membership at a special meeting like this are. You all may know, you may not know, you are a nonprofit corporation that is set up through the Secretary of State by Articles of Incorporation. The Articles of Incorporation have a provision in there which is standard that defaults to your bylaws for voting rights of members. Your bylaws set up a system whereby you have an annual meeting or elect a board. There's a provision in your bylaws that says that at meetings like this, membership meetings, the ability of the members to actually vote on an issue is limited to those votes that are required in the bylaws. I've gone through your bylaws, which aren't really long, about 5 or 6 pages, and are fairly typical. And there's only 3 circumstances under which you are permitted to vote. One has to do with election of the board. One has to do with, I can't remember what they are, compensation for the directors. There's a specific provision there. There were compensation for the board of directors. There would be a vote on it. And the third has to do with your ability to amend your bylaws, which the association members could vote on. But that's it. There's no other voting opportunity by membership at a meeting like that. So my view is that there's not an opportunity to take a vote on, in this case, your master plan by the members here at a meeting like this. You can ask, and it is required that the meeting be held, which is what has occurred, but I don't think you can backdoor an issue to vote on by the membership if it's not permitted by the bylaws. In my view, it's not. It's pretty straightforward in my judgment. People could disagree about the wisdom of how it's set up, possibly. People could disagree about, whether this is the kind of bylaws you want or don't want, but the bylaws themselves are pretty clear and frankly typical. Because otherwise you get into situations where it's a corner phrase, but micromanage decisions that, in your case, the way the corporation is structured, are reserved to the board for decision. That's my view on it. And I can talk about it in as much detail as anybody wants to talk about it, or directly by the board, but that's the way I see it.
Will you take follow-up questions?
The questions would need to come to us, but we'd be happy to if you have a question about what the content of the bylaws is on this point.
Yeah, so I'll direct to the board, follow based on what the board's attorney has interpreted. There are three circumstances in which members can have a vote. The third of the three that he mentioned is to change the bylaws themselves. Under what circumstances can that vote be initiated to change the bylaws? Can that initiation request come from members, or must it come from the board?
Actually, I don't have that question in front of us here at this point. That wasn't one of the pieces brought to us. I think the, I don't know, I didn't go there.
The bylaws.
I know it's at the annual meeting, David, as we considered 2 years ago, that that's an opportunity. So I'd be glad to get back to you on that question. It's a brand new question that we didn't go forward for.
If you're going to change the bylaws, it's either, the changes must be posted 30 or 60 days prior to that annual meeting. But the annual meeting is the only place you can do it. So therefore, something has to start at least 60 days before the annual meeting, if that's what you
Can
want.
you show us where in the bylaws it says that can only happen at the
I'll
annual
be
meeting?
glad
Because I
to meet
reviewed
with
it,
you.
and it does not say that.
I'll be happy to talk to you about that separately after this meeting. That's not one of the questions that's in front of us now, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that. By the way, the annual meeting is not very far off, so in fact, we're looking at that. So
Are the bylaws posted on the web?
they are right on the website, quite accessible.
I have a few copies. Didn't print many.
Okay. Are there any other questions about the things, Mr. Zeckler?
Yeah, I did.
Yes, sir.
I've actually got a copy from you. I've acquainted myself pretty well with the bylaws. Certainly, after having talked to 3 separate attorneys, I was given 2 people who don't specialize in nonprofit and HOA said that they thought that the petition was valid. An HOA attorney said that he thought it was questionable and wasn't sure how it would move forward. So certainly, I think it is up to your discretion as to whether or not to allow a vote. I guess from the sentiment that was expressed by everyone who signed the petition, there definitely seemed to be a pretty large number of people who were supportive of the vote. And I guess my question to the board would be, why don't you want to have or allow everybody to vote on it?
So why don't I'll be happy to discuss that, but I want to finish up questions number 1 and number 2. If there are any questions, which I'll be happy to do that, I think that's under number 3, which we can certainly get to. I'd like to finish these in order, and so we really stay focused and go through the agenda as it's written. Are there any, I appreciate your point. Is there any further questions about?
Yes, to number the first reason that the attorney mentioned is there's nothing in the bylaws that says that a vote can happen. Would you apply that same set of circumstances that if the bylaws specifically can't be done, would you apply that to other board business as well?
I think we did look at that piece of it, and I would read the pieces, call your attention, and I will do this separately again, to the sections that vest and have vested for 42 years.
I don't think you answered my question.
Excuse me, sir. You vest the authority of those decisions for the operations of the board in the board. And so that is a board prerogative, and that is, to me, a larger point, a very large and important point, regardless of who is on the board and regardless of what the issue is in front of them. So I want to get through these, and we'll move to Mr. Corbett's point, which may be yours as well, about what we ought to do as a board, which is a different matter, as Mr. Zeckler indicated. I think any board that's operated in this association has a lot of prerogatives, a lot of responsibility is vested in it by the bylaws, and have been since, at least in the modern versions of them that I've seen for the last 20 years. So I believe that is the answer to your question, is that the other specific sections vest authority in the bylaws, in the board, for all other questions. Any other comments? comments on the first two questions? Either.
Jack, can you repeat those two again before we move on to the first two?
Sure. First two questions were VHCA board response to petition at a special election on the master plan. Ms. Keenan gave that. VHCA bylaw requirements, number 2, for special association meetings and votes by association members. Mr. Zeppler addressed that.
One question related to that then is, what is the point of having a special meeting? What is your purpose to a special meeting? If no business can be transacted, it requests a membership, what is the purpose of even having it?
That's a fair question, and one of the things we could look at that question to help answer it, one of the things that illuminates that on any such procedure is to look at the history of how and why it's been used and what the purposes are and where they came from. Here was certainly, I've talked to many past association presidents, not all of them at this point, but certainly, and Ms. Ferraro and I looked at this 2 years ago when we did the last review of the bylaws, which was mainly trying to rearrange them and clear them up and get all the appropriate sections in the right spot. So this, if I understand this, and I will invite Ms. Curry and Ms. Ballman and anyone else who's been in the association for a while to illuminate this on this. I believe this dates from a time all the way back into at least the 90s and back into the 80s, I think, when communication was handled very, very differently in Virginia-Highland, when there was not email, when there were not easy opportunities to raise issues to board members or to get word out on a mass scale. When you wanted to do things, you went door to door, or you got petitions up, or you called meetings. That was how one of the very earliest meetings of what later became the Virginia-Highland Civic Association that I was in, and a couple of other people I think were in this room, was held down in what was then the proposed highway site. It was a meeting. The purpose of this, given that you didn't have these various and instant methods of communication, was to allow members to reach the board in a very special way, without waiting for a board meeting, to raise an issue that they thought needed to be called to the attention of the board immediately, and to demonstrate their feelings, thoughts, and logic behind what they were arguing. And I believe it goes back to that. I invite anybody, Mr. Kushner, anyone else, Mr. and Ms. Curry, to comment on it. I think it goes from that. And there have been, to my knowledge, 2 meetings held, and I will be happy because this is where the anecdotal only records of so many volunteer groups could be improved. We know of one that was held correct me on my dates if I'm wrong here, in the late 1990s, to try to ask the board specifically to take a certain position related to the potential expansion of a restaurant issue near the corner of Virginia-Highland. Am I correct on that? I will offer others a chance to comment on it. And I heard anecdotally of a second one, and they were both designed to raise issues and ask the board to take specific positions. Ms. Curry, any comments or illumination on this for us?
Well, the only one that I remember was in 1992, and it was about the one that you just referenced. And it was to ask the board, and the board did vote on that, not the people who had signed the petition, to give money to a lawsuit, which the board did appropriate that money. And it was about a restaurant.
Proposed restaurant expansion at the corner of Virginia-Highland. Mr. Kushner, do you remember any other such examples?
I don't recall any special meeting being called while I was on the board or any time.
When Ms. Farrar and I looked at it, it seemed like a quaint vestige from the past, but one worthy of keeping, because if there is an issue that 50 people think is worthy of hearing, I think the board ought to meet them and hear it. And I think that's a perfectly worthy thing to do. And this, being able to make their argument to the folks who represent you on this issue is a key issue. And I think we petition Mr. Wan and other of our representative elected officials frequently for the right to be heard and to make our case. Sometimes we make our case in a way that their vote reflects, and sometimes we do not. But that is a fundamental right in a democratic representative group. So I think that's where it comes from, sir. Anyone else have any other thoughts on this particular point, historical or other ones? Do we have any further comments on items 1 and 2, and then we'll move to item number 3, which is discussion of process.
I just ask a question, maybe just like give it.
Not at all, sir. We identify yourself, please.
Sure, Jeff Woodward, 1159.
Thank you, sir.
In the bylaws in section 2.5, at the end, I just wasn't sure what the meaning of the last sentence is. It says, at all meetings, when requested by the board, association members may participate in a non-binding vote prior to the board taking final action.
That was a reference to a practice that was used to be used extensively in Virginia-Highland called the straw vote. It was designed to allow, to get some sense of, quote, residents' feeling on a position that were residents who happened to be in the meeting. I believe 2 years ago, we changed that language to voluntary language, or maybe it's always been voluntary. In fact, in our meetings, we have historically not taken such votes, and it's not because of any disinterest in what people think. It's because we've generally been willing to sit and talk until the cows come home to make sure that every citizen got a chance to express their opinion very specifically. And we continue to do that. Secondly, as I pointed out on a couple of relatively infamous occasions in the history of this association, I'll be glad to bore you afterwards with a lot of specifics if you like. It had to do with the alleged representation on an issue of great import in the middle part of the 2000s, the parking deck at Piedmont. In order to make that an actual resident vote, you would need to vet everyone at the door, show identification, issue appropriate voting chits. Otherwise, it turns out to be a vote as an informal thing of whoever is in the room. And because typically we have never felt it necessary to have that kind of, we never wanted to card everybody at the door and go through that, because the board vote is the one that matters. And because we go to great pains to make sure we hear what everybody has to say, we have not recently taken those votes at all. We haven't done it for years.
And the last time it was done was on an issue of great importance, I understand.
No, sir, the last time it was done was on a variance, the very first month that I was present, the very first month I was present. It had to do with a variance that I don't think very many people thought had any significance, when a citizen in the audience asked to do it, to my knowledge. Mr. Sir.
Yeah, okay.
Quick question, I mean, the way that you described that process, Jack, for the straw votes,
Yeah.
it sounds fairly similar to the way that it works at the NPU meetings, where they ask people to write down their information when they walk into the room, they do give them the chits, and they do take that vote that's not binding, but it is used, it was used at the last NPU meeting that I attended. How is it different than that?
That is a binding vote at the NPU.
Excuse me?
That is a binding vote at the NPU.
So if it can, I
There's
guess,
not, the board, there is an executive board at the NPU,
right?
but their vote counts more than your vote, anyone who lives in the neighborhood.
I understand that, but just the way that Jack described it, it sounds like a very similar process, and I'm just wondering if it can be done there, why couldn't it be done here just as easily?
Well, it could be if the bylaws were changed.
But it sounds like there's a provision in the bylaws already that allows it.
It allows it at the board's discretion, and the board did not believe it was necessary or warranted in this case. And that probably gets us to topic number 3.
But I want to make sure there are more questions on 1 or 2. And it does get us to question number 3, and I want to point out that's not because, it's hardly because we're uninterested in what anyone thinks. At the last meeting, we went until every person in there was no longer wanted to speak. Still feel that way. And we can discuss topics later tonight after this meeting that are not even on this agenda. I will stay around and talk to anyone after the meeting is adjourned about any issue, as we have done endlessly on this and other points. So I think that's the issue. I know we knew what folks in the room thought, and we know what a lot of other people thought. We were convinced, so it could be done. We didn't require it. The board doesn't require it.
So, but what harm would there be in taking a straw vote just to get the actual count of the sentiment of the room?
does not express, I don't find that it illuminates anything for me, and it would require now, in order to make residents here, we would have to do what we do at the annual meeting, which I hope you will attend this year, in which we actually ask folks to show identification. Now, we'll give you another example. We ask for more identification at the meal at Summerfest than we do at straw votes at NPUs. And that's one of the reasons I've never put the least bit of payment of attention. I do not know what it reflects or what anybody is voting on. I have no idea, and I don't find it. I would rather have much more sophisticated ways, including asking people to tell us what they think. I think that's or to write us and tell us what they think. I find that more limited. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Emily Gilbert. I live at 1170 North Highland. And just to the point about input and providing responses, I know I've been invited to at least 4, maybe 5 meetings about the master plan. Provided my input numerous times. I wrote it down across the street. I looked around. I made comments. I've spoken to members of the board about it. So I feel as though I've had my opportunity to do
Yes,
that.
ma'am. I think you're on point number 3, and I appreciate that. But I want to stick to the first
Sure.
2.
Sorry.
First 2, and then we will move on to number 3.
So just one other follow-up, Jack. I mean, the question you asked before about whether or not there was a recollection of using a certain product, I believe you said that you didn't have any recollection of using that straw vote in your memory at these meetings. Is that?
No, sir. I specifically said that the last time I used it was at a meeting at the Church of Our Savior, and I think the very first time I was president. And I knew I had made a very determined decision not to use it. And I have some real specifics I can tell you why, in which a straw vote was used to misrepresent the will of the citizens of Virginia-Highland, when in fact, I knew for a fact, and others, no one disputed it, that vote constituted largely a number of employees of 2 local nonprofits that did not live in Virginia-Highland. So it really requires a whole new process. When the NPU anticipates a close vote, most NPU votes are pretty rudimentary. When they anticipate one, they will set up an ID system at the door, and they will card everybody. And there will be upset people whose driver's license hasn't been changed, or they forgot to do it. And there will be arguments, and that happens, and that's okay. But that is a completely different approach to doing it. And that's why we don't do straw votes at the Virginia-Highland meetings. I'm really interested in what people tell us, really interested if they come, really interested in the notes they write, really interested in inviting people to planning and park and other meetings where they can really talk at leisure. Really interested in those things. So it has nothing to do with don't want to hear it. It has to do with actually really wanting to hear it, and not just the folks who happen to walk in to a room at any given moment. Yes, ma'am.
You know,
We'll get to you. We'll get to you. I promise. You'll be next.
it just seems to me that they have a petition and they have some ideas that they want to put out supporting the petition. And you seem to be rushing 1, 2, 3, and 3 is process. I know because I want to say something about process. But it seems to me that these people, even though I've heard it, should have the right to make their case. And are you not rushing through and not giving them some time to make their case?
Certainly wasn't trying to rush through anything, trying to keep it on an orderly, focused piece. Second of all, and I think that does come under the process, what was the process for making your case, and how was that done?
Well, I think that should be given to these people.
Well, that's
Okay.
number 3. I'm trying resolutely to get to it.
Hey, Jack, I just don't understand this question. Do you mean tonight, or that we're rushing it through tonight, or?
Well, yeah, 1, 2, 3.
I got you.
I just want to make sure that these people get a chance, although short, to state their argument.
We're here
Okay, all right.
to do that. So, yes, ma'am.
Linda Edmonds, Crestwood Drive. I just want to say I'd be willing to show my ID at this meeting if we could have a straw vote. I don't consider that any position.
Thank you,
Just
ma'am.
wanted to say that.
Thank you. Sir?
I don't know if this is any help, but I attended many of those meetings in the 90s and early 2000s where the board did ask for a straw vote of the audience. And sometimes the board voted with the audience and sometimes the board didn't vote with the audience. But the sense I got, correct me if I'm wrong, that as the communications changed through the years when email became more prevalent and the way to contact people and the issues got out there more readily, the need for the straw vote sort of dwindled away. Because when people attended meetings, they were a lot better informed about it as they were attending than they were in the earlier days. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it may be true. There's one other feature that's gone on here for a number of years, and certainly since these boards have come on, we've taped and put every meeting on the web, and we actually do, believe it or not, however alarming it may be, there are citizens that sit out there and watch these meetings after the fact and write us notes about it and ask questions about it. So I think that it's not a better or worse. The typical, I was talking to Kevin Cronin about this the other day. We both remember a handful of people at the meetings. The first time I was on the board when he was president, a handful. Most of them there because they had a variance or were supporting a variance or worked for somebody who had a variance. A handful. And there's a handful now. Very conscious of that. We really designed an approach to this plan, and I hope we can get to it in a minute, that was designed with that reality in mind. Our citizenry is very material, which was, that it still is, that it's electronically oriented, that there are a lot of ways to get information out to people, and we tried to do a combination of, so we'll get to that in a minute. So I think I just don't feel like a straw vote of the typical 5 to 7 people or 12 people sitting in the room tells us anything, illuminates very much of anything. And I don't even think it does here tonight. I mean, we're hugely concerned about this. The response of the citizens is hugely concerned. Believe you me, this process was designed to get a lot of response. I think you can agree we did that. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Kathy Bragg, Crestridge Drive, and this is the second meeting I've been to, and I actually Linda and I both spent the half hour with you at Aurora being talked at, but I don't believe that we felt that we were heard. So the fact that you say you hear and you listen is not the feeling that we came away with from that meeting or this one.
Thank you. Shall we move on to number 3? I'm trying to do this in an orderly way, not rushing.
I'd be interested in your response to that.
Yeah.
Sure, I would. The issue
How many else by show of hands feels that way?
I'm sorry.
I feel like you can't talk that, not listen to. How many don't feel that way?
So, and see, Ms. Wright, I don't think the fact that you were in a minority vote invalidates your point or eliminates your point at all.
But your point was that you felt you listened, and I don't feel like,
Yes, ma'am.
and I haven't spent a half hour with you specifically at that meeting. I didn't feel like we were listened to at
Yes,
all.
ma'am. I'm sure I didn't express myself nearly well enough.
Oh, I think you talked a lot.
It was what we were talking about, and I am going to move to number 3 now, was what we were talking about was the contents of the road diet, which is already city policy, and it is not up for adoption or rejection in this plan. It is already exists. It's been passed twice by city council. It's been policy for a number of years. It will remain policy for the foreseeable future, even if we all, no matter what we do, we deliberately took it as our goal and our responsibility to try to illuminate everyone to make this plan and its impacts as plain as they could be. We specifically rejected a suggestion that we soft sell the road diet because it would reduce potential. We rejected consciously and outright. Not because we're go road diet. We have some concerns and questions about it too. I come from a family of Georgia Tech engineers, and I assure you that I do not believe much of anything that engineers say just because they say it. I do not. But we have to start with what the city's policies and plans are. That's the reality that all of it is built on. It's not built on wishing that it weren't so. And so I was trying in my very best that day to explain to you what I thought the city was proposing. And so to the degree that you didn't feel heard, I think it's a failure on my part, and I apologize. If by heard you meant you wish the road diet didn't exist anymore, it's beyond my or this board's humble powers to accomplish. So I'm just trying to explain where we all started with. And I certainly apologize to you if I think I could repeat a lot of the things you said, but I apologize to you if I didn't feel you didn't come away feeling heard, because I really was trying to listen. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Stephanie Coffin on Highland View. I would just like to know if we have a spokesperson for this petition, and maybe we could hear that person.
I guess that would be me,
Okay.
since I organized it. And I would say that, with all due respect to the road diet itself, the purpose of the petition in no way was to speak about any individual recommendation that was contained in the master plan. The only purpose of the petition was to have a vote of the neighborhood on the recommendations in the plan, knowing that there was a lot of discussion that took place in various social media boards, in the various forums that took place. The petition tried very clearly and plainly not to take any position other than that those people that signed the petition wanted to have a neighborhood vote. It was very neutral in that respect, and there was no positive or negative about any aspect of the plan, only that everybody should have an opportunity to vote on it.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Was that a vote per recommendation or a vote on the entire plan? One vote, or is it about 98?
It was written at the time, I believe, in the March 10th draft to vote on each of that. It was 94 recommendations in the plan, because there were varying levels of discussion about the recommendations of the plan. Certain people had questions about, as Jack said, the road diet, some about the accessory dwellings. So rather than try and pick and choose, it was just very plainly not trying to assume that I knew what everybody had a feeling for or against. It was saying, let's vote on the recommendations within the plan. Obviously, that's a very onerous undertaking. I gave it a lot of thought. Jack and I had, I think it was a 2.5-hour discussion about how we would do it. There were certain things in there that I think weren't actionable because it required other groups that either had ownerships of property or control over them, that we could make a recommendation but couldn't actually action certain items. So I think there were some of those 94 items that would not necessarily have to have been voted on. I mean, it could have been a recommendation, but it was purely to hold the vote, and it was on each individual recommendation.
Yes, ma'am.
Seeing while I'm on, I'll just say that I am one of those people that watch the video, and I'm also a Georgia Tech engineer, so I've been consulted twice.
You're not the first and you won't be the last.
So I did watch the video, and I did read the master plan, because I didn't know anything about it, and I could blame my street captain for that, or I could blame myself for maybe not paying attention. I really had not heard of it, and so up until 2 weeks ago, I didn't know anything about it. And I watched, like I said, the last meeting, and I felt like people were very respectful, and they just want a chance to be heard. But one thing I will point out, when I looked at the master plan, one of the things I was looking for in the master plan was this widespread community support. And I just didn't see it there. You had a focus group of 35 people. You had an online survey with less than 200 people commented. I just, being one of the people that didn't know about it, and then seeing that there really wasn't much support in the documentation for it, I guess my question to you is, where do you believe you got this widespread influence?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would answer it, and every board member can chime in any way they want, but I would answer it this way. Perhaps more than some, I've had the chance to go on a variety of things that were involved in the planning, the inland expansion, some questions that some St. Charles residents had, and door-to-door on Monroe, which we had done, a process we had begun independent of the master plan, in response to a lot of letters we get from citizens on Monroe about conditions on that road. And in every one of these, no matter what the topic of the plan of the meeting was, with the consent of those in the meeting, once we finished, we turned to the master plan and made sure, asked if they had seen it, and there's some who had, some who had participated, some who had not heard a word about it. And then we tried to discuss what we thought were the basic precepts of it. Now, and we, in every case, asked people to go and to look at it and to send letters and comments. We've gotten a ton of comments at the board that are not in the master plan. We've got a huge amount of support for the plan, specifically as it's written now. In every single
Can you
case.
quantify them? Yeah, can you quantify? Because I just,
Sure.
yeah, being an engineer, I look for data and I just didn't see any data.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and actually, I'm pro-tech engineer. So
Okay.
my point was, just because they said it, I didn't believe it. That was my point. Otherwise, so I think we have something like 70 or so letters, to my knowledge, of specific support in the last 2 weeks.
On what's the total population? 70 on what? What's that?
70 out of what?
Okay, 9,000?
9,200 residents.
Over 9,000?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Adults and children.
Adults, children, all citizens together.
5,000 households, I think is what I read.
Yeah, something, 5,100 we estimate. We're actually very interested in that number. It's surprisingly hard to quantify. We try to a variety of ways to do that. And a ton more conversations with people all over the place. We've been trying to quantify any of those. I don't run home and say we talked to expos. We've also heard a number of criticisms and suggestions about the plan. And a lot of things got changed in the process of the plan. We designed the process to be a very specific iterative process for folks to, it was one of your classic, tell us everything you like, tell us everything you don't like about the plan, designed to elicit ideas about what people liked, loved, or aspired to in Virginia-Highland, what they feared or disliked, or what they thought, where they thought the place was going in a way that they wanted to avoid. Then we held the focus groups, and those were specifically designed to try to get certain kinds of input from lots of different folks. The commercial group involved commercial owners. The environmental group involved people that we knew and pre-identified that had expressed interest or been involved in natural resource causes, et cetera, parks, that sort of thing. And a variety.
I'm sorry, can you quantify the response to your online survey and to these focus groups? I'm just trying to understand the percentage of the support in the neighborhood, and I'm trying to really focus on if you guys understand the percentage of support in the neighborhood.
Well, I'd like to respond to that, and an important data point to consider is how other neighborhoods have developed their master plans and the framework that the city requires for the development of a master plan. And that framework required by the city has been exceeded by the process that we use. The city requires that there is a process for receiving public input, that there are meetings to convey the concepts that are being considered in the master plan. And we have exceeded the methodology used by other communities to develop their master plan, and we've exceeded the requirements of the city. And our city council
How have you
members...
exceeded what Cameron Park did? I'm just curious. You made the statement, just...
I'll be happy to answer
We've had more public meetings, more online
And
surveys.
you've not let the community at large vote for it.
I'll be happy to respond. I was in the Cameron Park meeting where 25 people made the decision out of however many
How many on
thousands.
the board? Look, I really feel what you're doing here is well-intentioned, but the way you're going about it is extremely divisive.
Could you just identify yourself?
I have done it before. Peter Giroux at 1145 Rosedale Drive. Please ask everyone else to identify
I
themselves.
hope I had done that, and I apologize if I didn't, and we'll try our very best. Ms. Curry.
I think at some point in time, everyone in this room has to realize that they have some responsibility to find out what's going on in their own neighborhood. I believe that there has been ample opportunity for everybody to do that. And so to come up at the last minute and want to make a lot of changes, it's like, why were you not involved in the beginning?
I'm sorry, respect, it's not asking for change.
Hold on. We're gonna go in order, we'll put our hands up, we're gonna keep laughing, it's gonna be good. Yes, ma'am.
Becky Grinter, I work at Georgia Tech.
Oh, dear.
I happen to believe in methods and method design. So I think maybe some of the calibration work we need to do here is sort of reflect on what do votes in elections really look like in general, right? Because I think that's the trade-off here is what does it mean to get a vote from the community, but what does it also mean that there's a large base of people who don't vote for all sorts of things that we might consider important, like general elections, local elections. So I don't know if the board have any kind of sense of like how their feedback looks in comparisons with what other neighborhoods get, but my understanding is from survey responses that you get 30%, you're doing extremely well if you get a 30% response rate, because Americans are so over-surveyed, they're just fatigued with it. There's a real chronic problem with survey fatigue. So I'd like to, I think that may help with some of the calibration work to figure out what constitutes good, because I think that's one of the things we're arguing about here.
Any neighborhood that got 30% would be the most democratic neighborhood in the history of the United States. We had more meetings. I watched Canada Park very closely. It was going on, we were talking about doing this. We went over and watched the meetings, listened to the responses, looked at the questions, watched the plan develop. I think in any quantitative sense, we did as well or better than they do. You mentioned the opportunity to vote. Canada Park has voted from time immemorial on one experiences, on everything that comes before them. I think there's a lot of nice advantages to that. It avoids the whole question that's being posed tonight. There are also an astonishing number of disadvantages to it, and we'll be glad to discuss that out of this meeting, and I really will happy to discuss it because we've talked about that as a topic with Canada Park as the poster child for some of the challenges that they get to. But my point, my response on that was not that Canada Park's great, we're evil, we're great, they're evil. They have bylaws and procedures, they should follow them. We have bylaws and procedures, we should follow them. We are hugely interested in more response, and we have talked about how to get it. We held an extra meeting at Aurora to try to get people out. We've done everything we know reasonably that we can think of that any other group has done. So
I'd like to add to that. Just in having been involved with the board for a long time and going to meetings, I think that the participation in this process has been as good, if not better, than what I've seen generally.
hold on.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Can't hear anything back.
The younger voices of the community are speaking right now.
Sorry, I'm Lola, but having been involved in various ways with the Civic Association since about 95, I felt that the participation in this process was as good as, if not better, than the participation I've seen in many of the processes, the attendance of meetings, the attendance of the annual meeting. I think it was a successful process. We wish we could get more people to come out and participate. We tried very hard, but I think we did get a great amount of commentary, and I applaud the citizens that did that. I certainly don't want to discredit all the time they spent by changing the dynamic and the process that we lined out at the very last minute. That almost, it could not be a fair process if you then change your process at the last minute.
I'll get to you in 1 second. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Kim Wilson. I live on 1189 Road Drive, and I'm very much in favor of the master plan. I came out to show my support today, and I appreciate all the hard work of the community. I just wanted to make a comment that, I own property that's in the Beltline Overlay Zoning District, and I didn't vote on that. I elected a representative in the city who made that decision for me. And I put input into all the Beltline meetings, I participated in the meetings, and there wasn't a vote. So that's an example of overlay zoning code that impacts my property tremendously, good or bad, and it's a democratic process. So I think we all need to keep that in mind. It's the way neighborhoods work, it's the way our government works, and that's just my opinion.
Mr. Corliss?
Just a couple of points based on what was stated. First of all, to that, this is not a government process, this is a neighborhood nonprofit process. But I think the point I was going to make is that there were a number of people that signed the petition that are in favor of what's included in the master plan, that just have a problem with the way that the process is run and want the ability to vote on it. There are also people that signed it that are not in favor of some of the recommendations, but again, it was written only so that there would be an opportunity to vote. I guess when we talk about the process, and I've heard people say that whether it's this petition coming up at the last minute, the petition itself absolutely was done the day that the vote was going to be held, but comments about wanting a neighborhood vote go back to February when the January 22nd 17-page draft was distributed for the first time. It's not a brand new subject, it's not the first time it's come up. So I think it's very disingenuous to suggest that this is a brand new topic coming up at the last second.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Kristen Smebby, and I also live on Monroe Drive. And I would like to say that, point out, just that I'm somebody that's very shy about social media and about email, and, when we had the public comment, I was the person that posted as guest because I hate for people to see my name out there. And, I think that there's a lot of people out there that, I feel like the process where we got an opportunity to comment on different things in the neighborhood, I loved the map, really allowed a lot more voices to have a voice, and the information that was part of that process was included as part of the master plan. And looking at social media as kind of a indication of what the neighborhood thinks is a really poor indicator, because a few negative voices really dominate that, and people that are kind of just give up on that discussion. And so I think we're getting to this point where there's a lot more, it takes a lot more to say that you support something, and the people that are negative are kind of running the debate. So I just want to say that I support the process, and I feel like I've been heard, and so I definitely can't say I agree with everything in there, but I see where we're coming from and where we're trying to go to.
How did you find out to start with? Because that maybe you guys could comment on how you initially engaged the community, because I feel like I missed an email or a post mail or something. And I don't think she was next door to me. I don't think you knew either until recently.
Well,
quite a few people don't know.
No, that's an
How did
excellent
you
question.
initially engage the neighborhood?
Sure, I think that's a good question.
And I can respond to that as well. Our primary method of communication for all neighborhood business is through The Voice, which is our electronic newsletter. And we had over 15 articles in The Voice related to the master plan. And I know because I drafted about half of them. And it took a significant amount of time to pull that all together. So we had numerous articles in the official newsletter of the neighborhoods of Voice. We also used the Street Captain program to disseminate emails about the plan. Our communications chair, John Becker, posted every notice of the meeting, not only in The Voice, but on VH List and Nextdoor, Neighbor, whatever it's called. And then we went around and hung up posters. So as you see, I'm a mother of 2 young children. I work full time, but I took time to walk around the neighborhood and put posters in businesses as well. So definitely the primary method was electronic communication, but it wasn't one notice, it wasn't one article, it was multiple articles over a 6-month period, multiple emails in multiple arenas. So for those people who feel like they didn't know about the meeting, first of all, I encourage you to make sure you sign up for The Voice, and get The Voice, because that is one of the best ways to keep abreast of what's going on in the community. And to visit the Virginia-Highland Civic Association website and make sure you're registered for The Voice. But one thing I feel confident is that the board, the steering committee, the focus groups, I feel confident that we bent over backwards to get information about this process out there. And did it reach everyone? Absolutely not. But I really can't imagine anything more. I mean, perhaps hiring a skywriter or something.
If I could make a suggestion, because Lola's been working on the historic district plan, and my house is one of the houses that's impacted in that. And you know, as much as I dislike the plan, Lola, I think she did a great job because she put paper in everyone's hands. And, you know, even though I am somewhat savvy on the computer, I get inundated with stuff on the computer all the time. And so it's just a suggestion that I think paper in the mailbox, people read it, and then we all started talking in our neighborhood, did you get this? Well, what do you think about it? So it's a suggestion that it might not be easy, certainly a lot easier, and you certainly did a lot, and I appreciate that, but, you know, I have a couple of neighbors who aren't online at all.
And it's a funny point you make that. We actually did that method in 2006 or 7 when we proposed the neighborhood commercial plan. And we hired, because I was in charge of the finding college boys that did it, and we went around and for the most part put them legally in people's homes. A few seemed to have come into mailboxes, but I didn't see that. And we heard a few complaints, as usual, about putting stuff on property and inevitably, but the funny part was we talked about it. The funny part was we got a very, very limited response from that. And I can only tell you that everything we do at every meeting we go to, at the Summit Fest, at everything, we try to sign up people for the voice. It's not ideal. We don't normally put out information about association processes through safety captains. We try to save that channel for safety purposes because of the factor you mentioned. But we did it this time because we thought it was really important. And I do want to make one other point here. Believe you me, if there's one way to get a response, it's to propose a historic rezoning. But this process, unlike neighborhood commercial, which was confined to rezoning commercial district property, does not propose any rezoning, doesn't change anyone's legal property or private property status of any such piece. It really does not do that at all. If we were proposing anything like our friends notice in the back that would have changed overlay district or changed your process, we would have been, I think, all over that. I think it would be absolutely imperative. And I think Ms. Carlisle was clear about that. If she was going to pass, if there was going to be any input on that, we had to notify every single individual formally, beyond even what you got. It's not here.
It's just that not everybody's online.
Yeah, you're right. It is a problem.
Paper in hand is still a meaningful effort, and you know, so that's all. It's not, you know, I certainly did a lot, but I'm just saying it still didn't reach some people, and that might be another thing you can add on. But this is kind of a big deal. At least when I look at the plan, it's pretty extensive. It's a big deal.
Sorry.
Thank you, David. I've got 2 questions that follow up on this. One of them is the primary communication channel, the official communication channel of the association, not of the neighborhood, of this nonprofit corporation, is the voice. How many people does that go to? That's one. And then 2, it used to go out by mail via U.S. Postal Service. Did the board consider sending it by U.S. Postal Service? And if so, how much would that have cost?
Yes, traditionally the voice was sent out by email or by mail, and there was a cost. Jackson will certainly know the figures better than I do, but a decision was made for efficiency, for environmental reasons, to do it electronically. The voice comes out much more often now that it's electronically. It's virtually free. It does not cost the association anything, virtually anything, to send it out electronically, and now it goes out every 2 weeks. I think the paper copy